Join me for a conversation with Ash Goldstein as they describe their journey through exploration of their own diversity and how they fit into the outdoor world of kayaking, climbing, skiing, and more. They'll share some of their insights around risk, around navigation, of radical authenticity, and some of their great adventures in the outdoors. Hope you join me. Welcome to the Avid Adventurer. I'm your host, Dave Secunda, founder of Avid Adventurer, and I am psyched you're here. Each week, just like today, I'll bring you an interview with a kiddo, young adult, or parent as they share not only the details of their noteworthy outdoor pursuits, but also how they navigate risk, challenge, setbacks, and service in their journey. It'll bring a smile to your face and you'll feel your heart expand as you get to know the inner landscapes of these athletes. After listening, I know you'll feel uplifted and ready for your own next Avid adventure. So let's dive in. Welcome, Ash. I am really looking forward to this conversation. There's so many different things that I want to ask you about and know about to layer on top of the things that I already do. But let me welcome you in and ask you to just introduce yourself at a high level, and then we'll start having a conversation.
Yeah, hi. My name's Ash Goldstein. I live in Boulder, Colorado. I'm 17. I use any pronouns, and I think that was everything.
Awesome. Great. So since we are kind of talking about the outdoors as a theme on this podcast, I want to invite you to just kind of share what has stood out to you in your 17 years in the outdoors. Either things you're proud of or things that were just amazing moments out there that come forward.
This past summer, I started volunteering with Diversify Whitewater, which is this awesome nonprofit based out of Fort Collins. And I did two paddle events with them. I did a skills day and a kind of like community paddle. Where they're completely free and they bring in these people who otherwise wouldn't have the opportunity to check out whitewater sports and basically teach them the basic skills of kayaking or like take them out on the whitewater section. And that was really cool. I really enjoyed that. I also got my wilderness first aid and swiftwater rescue certification this past summer, which I'm pretty excited about. In part because I'll be able to do more work in that realm and be like a more certified, like a better certified and experienced individual in that particular field. Also this past every year my school does a 8-day backpacking trip to kind of like launch us into the school year. And this past backpacking trip was a little bit brutal in the sense that it hailed every single day. And our tarps were less waterproof than we would have liked. And I was a senior and they're in like advisory groups. And so it ended up being kind of a lot of responsibility on me, but I feel like I handled that responsibility pretty well. And the trip was a lot of fun, despite sitting in lightning position probably a total of like 8 hours the entire trip.
Oh my gosh. Well, I find it interesting that three of the big highlights in the outdoors that you're sharing are really about moving more kind of into leadership positions and opportunities to kind of give back and connect with others in the field. But before I go deeper on that one, I do want to give you the opportunity, as I do with all our guests, to finish the sentence to give folks just a little bit more insight into who you are, and to just say, if you really knew me, you would know. So, take it away. Take that sentence and share something with our listeners.
You would probably know that if you needed an item, I'm the person to go to. Like if you need a random thing and we're at school, I probably have it. And
Excellent.
if you need some obscure thing for medical reasons, I probably have it. Yeah.
Excellent. All right. Well, probably a great person to have on any trip then, because there's always that need there. Well, tell me a little bit more. You shared a little bit about kind of moving into more of a leadership uh, position or leadership kind of trajectory in your outdoor career. And you talked about working with the program up in Fort Collins, getting some certifications, and even with your school kind of moving into a position on a difficult trip where some of the upliftment that you shared was really around kind of being able to navigate through that difficult situation as a leader. Talk a little bit about like your early days in the outdoors and kind of connecting the dots to now kind of turning more outward in the outdoors to working with other people. What things did you spend time with when you were a kid, and what kind of impact did they have, and then how did the bread crumb along to starting to spend time leaning into working with other people or wanting to do that?
Yeah, so I was raised in the Roaring Fork Valley, which is, includes Aspen and Glenwood Springs, and it's kind of like I was raised in Basalt, which is like a small mountain town. Um, Up until fifth grade, at the end of fifth grade, when I moved to
Hmm.
Boulder. Um, and I mean that valley is kind of the best place to learn to do a lot of sports. I mean, Aspen has some of like the state, if not the country's best skiing. Um,
Hmm.
like there's the Maroon Bells, which is crazy famous mountains, and we're nestled right in the Rocky Mountains. So there's a lot of sports that happen there.
Hmm.
Climbing up Independence Pass and down Norton Deer Rifle, and so it kind of was a given that I would engage in sports from a young age. I mean, my parents taught me to ski when I was like 2, and we would hike a bunch. I learned how to backpack there. And so it kind of was assumed that I would spend time in the outdoors. And part of that was also I had parents who really appreciated where we lived for that reason. And so, yeah, I spent a lot of time outdoors. I went to a school that had outdoor education. And so, you know, you kind of built upon that until just to build on your skills. And so that it became kind of an integral part of my young education. And so it was just kind of a given. So, like, yeah, skiing a bunch. I learned how to climb there. I would spend a bunch of time on the Roaring Fork River with my family. Uh,
Any any pitch?
not yet in a hard shell kayak, but usually like in
Got
an
it.
inflatable. Um, and so that was kind of, I guess, the origins of it all. But I
Hmm.
think I very
Got it.
quickly stumped. Sorry.
I was going to say, any particular standout early memories in the outdoors, either in a kayak or on a trail or something like that, that kind of stands out to you as an early formative experience?
Um, I distinctly remember the first time I hiked the Highland Bowl, which is like this very famous kind of series of runs up on top of Highlands, uh, Aspen Highlands, the ski mountain,
Ski runs, yeah.
and
Hmm.
and I think I was 12, and like it was this really big thing. Our ski instructor got us all matching sweatshirts, and like it was like this is what we've been building up to. So that I think that was kind of a really awesome experience. Also in part because it was very communal. It wasn't very like, oh, we're gonna go like conquer the Highlands Bowl. It was very like, oh, we're in it together and we're all working towards this singular goal. Um,
Mm.
and then I there's a section on the Roaring Fork River that's called Cemetery, and it's not actually that hard. It's not very technical. There's just some big rapids and a couple big-ish rapids in there, and I remember going with like a friend who hadn't spent much time on the river, and she was terrified. Like I remember being
Hmm.
terrified because she was paddling her own boat,
Hmm. And
and
you were kayaking?
Yeah, I think I was on an inflatable with my dad, I think. I was pretty young
Mm-hmm.
at that time. I must have been like
Mm-hmm.
9 or 10. And
Mm-hmm.
I was just distinctly remember like turning over to be like looking over to being like, it's fine, you'll be fine. And like like 9-year-old is like reassuring this like 40-year-old woman. And it was like a very I guess like a very humorous moment to me where I was like, oh wow, like I do have spent a lot of time and I'm quite comfortable in the outdoors in ways that are always, the standard. And I think that was kind of eye opening to me in the sense of like, oh, this is not an experience that everyone has. Um,
Mm-hmm. I love that. Well, there are a lot of parents who listen to this podcast. And so kind of growing up in that, is there any coaching or advice that you would give to parents who are trying to navigate what is appropriate and what is not appropriate as far as uh, taking their kids into the outdoors and kind of where the risk profile lands appropriately and what's right for them and their kid, like kind of growing up in that. Any perspective that you would now share with somebody who's trying to figure that out as maybe a first time or second time parent?
that's a really good question because a lot of the kids I grew up with are doing some of the most insane things now. And they're my
Mm-hmm.
age. They're paddling some of the hardest whitewater in the country. They're skiing some of the hardest stuff. Some of them are sponsored already. Um, and so that is a dilemma. Um, for me, I think my parents were a lot more conservative. I don't think like I think they saw that I had a very diverse set of interests, and so it like they encouraged me to go outside. They encouraged me to spend time in the outdoors, but it was never um, pushed, I think, the same way because I didn't demonstrate a singular passion towards it. I think that that's an important distinction too. Like if your kid is, singularly passionate about something, the best thing you can do is give them the skills to recognize risk themselves. So if
Mm-hmm.
it's skiing, taking Avid courses, making sure they're updated on that, making sure they're updated on wilderness first aid. I think you can get your wilderness first responder at 16. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and if they can't and if they can't get those certifications yet, like make sure your kids are going with reputable people who do have those certifications.
Mm-hmm.
And kind of like building up the resources and scaffolding so that ideally they have the skills to handle high risk situations.
Mm-hmm.
Because you're not going to keep your kids from doing high risk things. I mean, if your kid's passionate about an outdoor sport, they're going to do it regardless. Um,
I
like
love that.
when they're younger, they'll have more guidance, but as they get older, then and if you don't give your kid the skills, then that's a lot higher risk than just accepting, hey,
Mhm.
this is something that you're passionate about. This is something you're going to do. Here's the things that I can do to support you.
hmm Well, I actually feel like that is sage advice. It's amazing just to share back what I heard from you is really as a parent, first looking for that passion or that spark of passion, and then that's really really important to kind of see that in your kid and recognize it, and then amplify it, give opportunities to go deeper, and then scaffold it. To be able to provide instruction and opportunities for certifications to provide more and more of a kind of a container for those adventures to contain, to kind of live within. And kind of as you're saying, which I think we all know to be true, is as people grow, they're going to do what they're going to do. And so that's your kind of moment of influence as a parent, is to be by your kiddo's side through that journey overall. Interesting. So, Ash, talk to me a little bit about, as I have known you, your commitment to diversity in the outdoors. You talked about volunteering with this organization in Fort Collins. That was the first thing that you led with as kind of what you're excited about and proud of in the outdoors. So, talk to me a little bit more about kind of where that comes from, any personal experiences around that have kind of been foundational in you leaning in supporting kind of diverse populations and coming into the outdoors and kayaking.
Yeah, so I was adopted from China at 11 months. And I was one of, maybe a dozen, 2 dozen uh, Chinese adoptees that lived in the Roaring Fork Valley. at that time. Um, and I don't I don't think I really met a lot of Asian people or like black people or indigenous people or literally anyone except for pretty much primarily white individuals for probably like the first 10 years of my life. I went to like
Hmm.
heritage camp, so I met like other Asian adoptees there. But even that, like that was, you're going to a camp to see people. Like it was a very contained space, so it was not as, I
Hmm.
guess, supportive for me. Um, and so I immediately kind of stumbled upon this dilemma of, you know, there's a very pervasive culture in outdoor sports where I used to live, and I would say here in Boulder too. And it's very kind of like conquer centric, very like white settler oriented. And so for me, that was a really big dilemma because you know I'm I live in a primarily white state, or yeah, um,
Hmm.
and so just fundamentally being an Asian adoptee kind of created this tension. And so for me, it became an issue of, well, what can I do to kind of mitigate that? How can I try and form community, not just for me, but also for every other individual that experiences things similar to me? And so I started, yeah, doing research for different organizations. Um, Diversify Whitewater is an awesome one. There's like some really cool uh, organizations depending on sports because I'm mostly kayaking. I mostly focus on organizations that are doing stuff for kayaking. But Rios to Rivers is an amazing one, and I think they're based out of the Pacific Northwest. So I just started being drawn to that because I didn't want to exist in outdoor spaces in a way that kind of perpetuated that white settler mindset because it didn't feel inclusive or like supportive of all the people that outdoor sports could be really beneficial to.
Mm-hmm. I got it. So, and what I hear you say is just like really comes from this personal experience of kind of both uh, looking for where you fit in and also not wanting to promote what you see as kind of a white settler mentality of conquering and big agendas in the outdoors. And so kind of your answer is to kind of lean in where you have on the volunteering on supporting diverse populations in the outdoors. Well, that's beautiful. Have you had experiences that come to mind specifically where you've felt like you know you haven't fit in, or kind of it was difficult to navigate specifically in the outdoors? I mean, you talked about growing up in the Roaring Fork Valley, but you've covered a lot of ground since then. Is that something that has persisted in different environments, or not?
It's kind of always there.
Hmm.
I think it's particularly severe in kayaking, um, just because we're a very small community. We're one of the smaller, like, there's not a lot of us. There's, I think, like
Hmm.
100,000 people in the United States, something like that. So it's very intimate. Um,
Hmm.
and so there's not the same kind of progress that's being made in climbing or skiing and like these conversations that are being had. Uh, they're starting to happen in kayaking, but there's a little bit of like a lag. Um,
Hmm.
I I think I went to a summer camp this past summer, and it was kind of like this training camp for kayaking, and I think there was a lot of tension for me throughout the trip or throughout that course because it was a very high intensity kind of camp, and I loved
Hmm.
it. It gave me a ton of skills. Um, but as a person who was there to learn skills and wasn't necessarily there to like throw myself into the biggest hole and see what happens,
Hmm.
um, I think that kind of created a disconnect between me and my peers who are also like young kayakers and were awesome, but also just had very different goals within
Hmm.
the sport of kayaking. And so that kind of created some tensions that I had to navigate.
Mm-hmm.
So
Got it.
that's really
Got it.
recent.
Yeah, understood. And do you ever feel like a pressure in that kind of a situation to show up a certain way or represent or something like that, as far as like being a change maker, or like how do you show up when you are feeling that, and noticing that inside?
I guess there's always a little bit of a dilemma in that space because, if I can be the person who's calling you out on your microaggressions. I can be the person who's acknowledging that this mentality that we're having is harmful to a lot of other people, right? But that
Mm-hmm.
obviously puts me in a very awkward position because I'm the only one doing it. And
Mm-hmm.
fundamentally, I'm also one of the few that's aware of it. So there's that fundamental issue of there's just no awareness of the fact that that is a mindset. It's not, it's just the standard. It's not deemed as something that's um, even worth like considering because it's just what is expected. And so I guess for me, the expectation to be good representation is very much there. Like the expectation to kind of be, uh, you know, a good example for other people like me, because
Mm-hmm.
for a lot of people, like
I
I'm the first Asian at the meeting, so I guess like that's sort of
Yeah.
present.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you inside have a lot of diversity in so many ways. I think, it's like you show up, and there's always going to be a box that folks are just like, wow, you're outside of my box, so to speak.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, well, talk a little bit about, if you would, one of our early connections was you as a camper at Avid Adventurer. And again, kind of a lot of our listeners have that connection as well. How did that play into your early experiences in the outdoors? And kind of what did you take away from those experiences as you kind of grew and continued on your own trajectory?
I think Out for Adventure continued to grow my passion for the outdoors and to kind of highlight to me some of the issues that are existing currently in the outdoor spaces. I had that same dilemma of like there's I just could not relate to my peers. Um, so I ended up spending a lot more time with the instructors who are amazing and the counselors are amazing and I love them. Um, and but I think the the ability to kind of focus in on something for a week and not have to worry about a lot of other things was
Mm,
hugely beneficial, and I think it gave me a lot in terms of skills. Uh, and it pushed me, it scared me, um, but I think that that's really important as a young individual to kind of continue to push your kids. And I'm so grateful I have a mom who's pretty insistent on continuing to do things that are a little bit out of your
mm,
comfort zone and hopefully uh, helping people to grow and evolve a little bit during that period. So I think Avid for Adventure gave me a lot of foundational skills and passions.
awesome. Do you remember how old you were when you did your first Avid Adventure program?
I think it must have been like 8 or 9.
Yeah,
Um,
that's
and I
awesome.
did like the 5-day camp multi-sport
Hmm.
uh,
Hmm.
one, I think. Yeah.
Got it. Got it. How, you talked about that feeling of avid and other situations in the outdoors, coming up against that edge of your comfort zone, and also feeling some feelings of fear come up. I'm sure as you get into bigger whitewater situations with more and more unknowns. I think of whitewater as the ultimate dynamic medium of the unknown, really, compared to what I spend a lot of time doing, rock climbing, which is fairly static. Talk about how you deal with kind of both feelings of fear and assessing risk, and how did those show up for you, and in your relationship with your with your mom and dad as well? Are there conversations about that, or how does that path get navigated?
You know, uh, I just came back from winter break in Costa Rica, and my mom and I were just recently having a conversation about whether or not like climbing or kayaking or surfing we would deem more risky or dangerous for like the average
Mm-hmm.
participant. Um, which was a really interesting conversation. I'm constantly fascinated by risk. I think I've spent a lot of time learning to assess risk, learning how to approach risk. Uh, Part of that is just the fact that like I go to a school that values that. I have parents who value that. Um, I would consider myself pretty conservative in general in terms of
Mm-hmm.
sports.
Mm-hmm.
I'm here for a good time. I have nothing to prove. Um,
Mm-hmm.
which I think is a little bit countercultural in terms of, especially like the kayaking world.
Mm-hmm.
But I guess for me, the biggest issue I have with fear usually is um, the pressure. Like if you're with other people, like especially in kayaking, that pressure becomes pretty present.
Mm-hmm.
And so learning how to navigate that, learning how to kind of branch off from what the group is doing, and being authentic and how you're feeling and what you believe, uh, which I think I've developed a lot of skills in. And then the other thing, and I think a lot of kayakers can probably relate to this, is just locking in. Like the fact that I think, and I was actually talking to another friend of mine who climbs and surfs and a bunch of sports. I was talking to him recently about this, and he's like, "Well, you can, like, when you're climbing, you can stop, like, pretty much. Like, you can mostly stop. You
Mm-hmm.
might have to go for a little ways to like climb up to the anchor, but then you can stop. And in kayaking, there's like a certain continuousness.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that continuousness kind of creates this interesting dynamic because at a certain level, it's terrifying and it's awful, and risks can quickly kind of multiply on each other. But on the other hand, it kind of forces you into this very particular mindset. And I haven't experienced that mindset anywhere else. I think that's part
Mm-hmm.
of the reason why I'm especially drawn to kayaking, where it's like, okay, this is what's happening. I'm at the top of this massive rapid. I guess I just have to lock in and paddle well to the rapid because I can't get out of it now.
Mm-hmm.
And so kind of that difference, there's not really a way out usually when you're
Mm-hmm.
kayaking.
How has that mentality and that learning come into aspects of your life outside of spending times in the outdoors, or has it?
In general, I would consider myself someone who locks in on things.
Mm-hmm.
Uh,
Mm-hmm.
I spend a lot of different times on projects, and I'll look up and it's 2 a.m. and I didn't realize.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that actually helps me a lot when I'm kayaking.
Mm-hmm.
But I think kayaking has also just given me that sense of like radical acceptance in the sense of this is what's happening, and we're just gonna have to roll with the punches. Like this, like you might get flipped over, you might hit your head on a rock, like we're going to heads council, and there might be someone might bring up something, and we're gonna have to figure out a solution to that. I'm on the citizenship committee on my school, which deals with discipline issues, and so there's constantly like new developments in these different issues, interpersonal issues at school, and how are we going to deal with that? And so I think it's drastically built my ability to problem solve and kind of go with the flow.
Mm. I love that. So taking that experience you've built in the outdoors and that muscle that you've built of the requirement to go with the flow, especially from your background in kayaking, where sometimes there's not an option, and so it's kind of, as you said, this radical acceptance and embracing of that, and then bringing it into the broader experience of life unfolding with that same radical acceptance. That's amazing. I love it. Um, well, Ash, one thing that's so common in outdoor experiences is is constantly getting tossed in with a kind of a new group of people, whether you're at the helm of that group as a leader or a participant in that group, or partnering with somebody in a new adventure, there just kind of is this this natural flow where you're doing something new, you're going to a new place. It's likely you're going to also at that same moment be in a mix of new people. That's not as common outside of the outdoors. Like many folks will, let's say if they're on a sports team or they're doing something like that, it's like the team and they might be with that team for years. And it's those same people showing up. When you're showing up so often in these new situations of groups, how do you decide, or do you, how is it that you navigate how much of yourself to share and what to share when? I'll just share one quick vignette with you. I was on a Zoom call with you, a month or so ago, and the whole call was wrapping up. And at the end of the call, you said, "Hey, I just want to share this little art that I've been working on the call." And I know you as an incredible artist. I mean, that's kind of one of the amazing things. I know you haven't talked about that at all on this podcast, but in that moment, it was like, okay, you were bringing another layer of yourself to these folks who everyone was just like, "Wow, that's amazing. Thank you for sharing that." But again, it's always a risk of what you share of yourself and when. How do you navigate that and figure out how to move forward in those situations?
I think oftentimes for me, it comes down to a matter of safety. Because of the position I'm in, and because of the nature of the work that I want to be doing, it kind of requires me to be a little bit radically authentic in terms of talking about myself and being myself, which can be very daunting. But I think, sometimes with these sports, you are putting your life on the line and you are entrusting in your partners that if something goes wrong, you will rescue me, you will help me. And I cannot have any doubts that will be the case. And so I guess for me, it's how can I continue to be me? But like if I'm noticed, but like minimize that tension, at least like if we're in like a high pressure environment. Like if I'm partnering with a new fellow kayaker and we're going down these massive new rapids that like I'm not very familiar with, I'm probably going to be a little bit more hesitant about that. And part of it is I think it's hard to explain when it's just been the standard all your life, is navigating when it is time to share that information. Because it's usually, for me, it's usually not a question of if I'm going to share that information, it's usually a question of when. And so,
is there an experience you can share of when you did lean in and share that and it was reflected back with either gratitude or positivity, or the opposite? Like, is there some anchoring around that to share with folks? Because I think what you're sharing of this radical authenticity is a life's journey. And I think, many folks are kind of trying to figure out how to navigate that.
Yeah, this past summer, again, at that camp, we had weekly kind of like public speaking skills, or like assignments, because it was like, it's supposed to be a youth development camp. And so there was like public speaking and writing and you have to learn how to cook and clean up after yourself. And so there's kind of these other skills off the water, which I actually really appreciated, that it wasn't just like a try hard kayaking camp. But for the last week, they asked me to talk about diversifying whitewater and why I care about that. And so here I am in this like cramped conference room, and it's like ungodly hot. It's like 80 degrees out, and then the humidity is insane. And we're like halfway through the 23 kids, and you're supposed to have, you don't have a time limit. So like some of us are taking like 15 minutes, and it's getting a little bit lengthy. But basically I go up there and I talk about my experiences in whitewater, and I talk about limitations to access, and I talk about why it matters. And a lot of kids didn't get it, which was frankly to be expected. A lot of kids kind of like gave me that weird look of like, okay. And, but a few kids did get it, and a few kids were asking really important and good questions about it. And so I think to me, that was worth it, because those kids, now are more aware of it, and those kids moving forward will be more considerate of it, even if it is just a few of them. And those kids will continue to kind of spread out, or like continue, hopefully, to build on their awareness and their education surrounding that. And so I guess it was worth it to me. And I also, like, it wasn't a risk of my safety, so it was worth it.
I love that. Thank you, Ash. That was such a pleasure. Let me see if there is. Let me ask you one more question, then we'll wrap up on this one. These days, what brings you the most joy?
I think it's little things, because the world is incredibly overwhelming. It seems like there's just an unimaginable amount of sorrow and despair present, and unimaginable horrors present. And so I guess for me, it's little moments that bring a lot of gratitude. It's kind of like, just sitting in my kayak on the water, and like the water's the crazy blue, and you're just appreciating that. Or it's like, driving home late one night and kind of appreciating the sky and the open roads. And there's just like a certain, I think I find I'm constantly in awe of the world, because like the amount of steps and innovations and breakthroughs that have gotten us to today is insane. And like that gives me so much hope and joy, and trust that as human beings, we will continue to figure it out. So I think I find joy in little things. I find that the big things can get quite overwhelming and can quickly lead to despair. So I find a lot of joy in little things.
Awesome. Ash, thank you so much for sharing yourself and what makes you happy, and the path that you've navigated in the outdoors with me and all of our listeners. I so appreciate the time that we had together today.
Yeah, thank you, David.
I hope you enjoyed hearing from this avid adventurer as much as I did. Join me every week as we continue to explore the inner landscapes and outer accomplishments of our guests. And if you know someone who you think would make a great interview, please reach out to me at the email in the show notes. I look forward to reconnecting next week.